On 26 October 1997, emergency responders found 26-year-old Joe Cinque dead at his Canberra home. He had died from an overdose of heroin and Rohypnol given to him by his girlfriend, Anu Singh.
She seemed to burn friendships like paper.
The narcissism in the personality disorder exhibited in this case is a severely disturbing narcissism. If they're not given special treatment, they become enraged, they become furious.
Only concerned about what happens to her.
Giuseppe Joe Cinque was the eldest son of Italian migrants, Maria and Nino Cinque. Growing up in the city of Newcastle in New South Wales, Joe, as he was known, flourished in and out of school.
He was a smart, studious, helpful child around the house who loved spending time in the garden with his parents, and a beautiful garden.
He was from a traditional family. He was a source of great joy to them, having probably been the first university graduate in the family, and generally a good guy.
In 1997, Joe moved to Australia's capital, Canberra, to start a new job.
A very loved big brother, and had his whole life in front of him. Extremely intelligent, articulate, talented engineer, working for a local company here in Canberra, who was going places.
He met a university student called Anu Singh. Born in 1972, Anu was the daughter of two medical practitioners.
She was something of a special child at school. She was bright, and she was studious up to a point. But then in her early teens, I think she discovered the joys of boys and teenage rebellion, and caused quite a headache for her parents. But certainly was someone who was very adept at attracting attention and seeing herself as a special person within her peer group.
A successful student at school, in 1991, Anu obtained a place at the prestigious Australian National University in Canberra.
She didn't cope very well when she left her home and went to the ANU to study a double degree in economics and law. And she really didn't cope well. She became quite miserable. And I think she abandoned her first year of studies and returned to the parental home.
Deferring her course, she returned to university in 1992. While she was there, she had embarked on a relationship with another student, Simon Walsh.
She had a boyfriend, and I think she settled into studies somewhat better, but she was always in need of being the focus of attention and being reassured about how attractive or how clever or how desirable she was. And that relationship with Simon ended, and it ended in difficult circumstances because I think there might have been the early meeting with Joe Cinque that interfered with their relationship, and he dumped her.
Anu and Joe entered into a relationship of their own.
The relationship having started well and having been seen as an ideal couple and having appeared amongst friends as being a happy duo, wasn't going that well. And so there were tensions building. Her focus was more and more on her physicality.
In May 1997, she was convinced she was suffering from a degenerative condition and blamed Joe for it, since he had mentioned Ipecac to her, a syrup used to induce vomiting. after she had become focused on her physical size.
And she blamed Joe for telling her to take it. It's a simple answer, isn't it? Don't take it if you don't like it. That's all she had to do. And then, but I think this was only a ruse. I don't think that was the real reason.
During the many interviews that were conducted and statements taken, both with other ANU students, friends, work colleagues, it appeared to me that the relationship had come under a degree of stress, and that stress was caused by Anu's focus on what she perceived to be her medical problems. And Joe, it appeared from these conversations, was becoming tired of this.
She was preoccupied with her physical symptoms that were discounted when she went to see specialist doctors. She believed she had a neurological disorder that was, she was checked out and that was dismissed. And so she was living with a lot of external preoccupations, and the state of the relationship probably was affected by that.
The relationship, it seemed, was coming under increasing strain. But the prospect of Joe leaving Anu was intolerable.
This all came to a head in that there had been months and months of this disturbed behaviour that, to my mind, were examples of a fragile, personality disordered person not being able to meet her needs to be reassured, to be the centre of attention, to be admired and loved by everyone.
Over the course of 1997, Anu's behaviour became increasingly alarming. The law student was plotting a so-called suicide pact for her and Joe. Cinque engaged a fellow student to help research her plan, Madhavi Rao.
Madhavi Rao was another law student that was at the university with Anu, and somehow or other she became tightly involved with Anu. She was a person who went with Anu and studied on how to kill people at the library.
Anu Cinque made attempts to procure a firearm, which were unsuccessful on a number of occasions. She then settled on researching the use of drugs and substances.
The drugs Anu researched were a hypnol, a tranquilizer, and heroin, an opioid.
Poisoning as a methodology to commit murder takes out of play a physical need to overcome one's victim. The poison is administered surreptitiously, usually. There is control in the sense that the victim obviously doesn't know that they're about to be poisoned, but the perpetrator is in a commanding and controlled position, and often that's in itself gratifying for the perpetrator. So it put Anu Cinque in a strong position of domination and control.
Anu began putting the pieces of her plot into place.
Then she went to people who used heroin and found out how to procure heroin. She found out how much a large amount would cost her. She had somebody who was skilled at constituting heroin into a liquid injectable form do that for her. She had lessons in intravenous injection technique, so she could do that. So she made very determined efforts to gain this knowledge and information and skill.
Anu Cinque was preparing a dinner party.
The party supposedly was that Anu Cinque and Joe Cinque were going to commit suicide together. That was the concept of the party.
So the build-up that led to these dinner parties was really the build-up of this very dramatic and immature idea that she and her friend Madhavi Rao would be able to put together a guest list of university friends who would come to this farewell dinner, in inverted commas, where they would witness this dinner occur and where there would be a murder-suicide enacted with them as dramatic participants in this bizarre drama.
I think that's an interesting thing.
This one piece will make 52 layers.
Watch on mobile devices or the big screen. All for free. No subscription required.
On the 20th of October, 1997, guests gathered to witness a so-called suicide pact. A pact Joe Cinque knew nothing about.
Nobody spoke to Joe whether he was a willing partner in all of this, whether he really did want to commit suicide. To be invited to a party where one party suggests that two people are going to die and not ask the other party, who's sitting at the table, mind you, seems very macabre. During the party, of course, Anu Singh had given Joe the Rohypnol in his drink. He'd gone to sleep. When the party dispersed, she injected him with, or tried to inject him with the heroin, but the heroin had coagulated, so she couldn't get it into his blood. So she left that one and then got Madhavi to arrange a second party.
The second party occurred on Friday, the 24th of October, 1997.
And so they all sort of turned up again and repeated this bizarre activity.
They were law students and they were willing to go to a party, willing to know that people, whether it was one or two, were going to die at that party. And that's the question of the morality of it all. That's the question, I think, that maintains the perplexity of this case for over 20 years. I think people find it very, very hard to get their head around how people could have been so cold as to go and do this, and what are those people doing today?
The heroin was pre-mixed and it was drawn up in syringes ready to go by the heroin experienced friend, so they had these pre-prepared syringes.
The second time, of course, the Rohypnol was given.
Sedated, Joe, according to Singh, didn't wake up until 6 p.m. the next day. Then, during the morning of Sunday the 26th of October, Anu injected the lethal dose.
Joe was asleep, and later on that morning, early in the morning, that's when she injected the heroin.
After making a series of phone calls to friends throughout the morning of Sunday the 26th of October, Anu eventually rang for an ambulance at 12:10 p.m., initially giving a false name and the wrong address.
So he was cyanized by the time she rang the ambulance. He was blue around the lips, and she said that.
By the time paramedics arrived to their home, Joe was unresponsive. Detective Sergeant Harry Haynes was the first homicide officer on the scene.
There was fire brigade, ambulance, and there was a couple of other police there at the time when I arrived, general duties police. I went upstairs and had a look at Joe, who was clearly deceased, and the ambulance told me he was deceased, and just obtained what had actually happened from them. Meanwhile, Miss Singh was downstairs in an agitated state. I dealt with a lot of heroin overdose deaths, genuine heroin overdose deaths. And at this stage, from what I could see, it appeared that Joe had quite a pronounced injection mark in the crook of one elbow. But essentially what I wanted to know was what happened. I had a conversation with Anu sitting at the table, at the dining room table, and I made notes of that conversation as it happened. And during that conversation, she intimated to me that Joe had had heroin and that she had given him that heroin. When Miss Singh told me that, I gave her a criminal caution, as I'm obliged to do, because I'd formed a belief that she had committed a serious criminal offence. And at that point in time, I placed her under arrest for murder. She dropped to the ground, kicking at me, and she was handcuffed, and physically forced her up to her feet and led her outside to a car and forcibly put her into the back seat of a car and locked the door.
It was the start of a long process. With Anu in custody, investigators had to confirm Joe's cause of death. Toxicology tests confirmed toxic quantities of rohypnol and heroin in his body.
We need to piece together what we actually think happened. And what it appears is that rohypnol, well known to many people as a date rape drug, renders people insensible with no memory of what's actually gone on when they wake up in the morning. Rohypnol was detected in his blood and remnants of rohypnol in a coffee mug beside the bed. So I believe that Anu Singh placed rohypnol in his coffee and waited for Joe to be unconscious and then injected a large amount of heroin into his arm, who for someone who had never had heroin before, because you build up a resistance to heroin, you're not opiate naive anymore. Joe would have been opiate naive, would have been and was a fatal dose of heroin.
Heroin causes extreme drowsiness and can shut down the body's respiratory system. Its chemical effects on the brain are so alien, the body responds by trying to violently eject the lethal substance.
The heroin is a respiratory depressant. It's a central nervous system depressant. Heroin overdose deaths can take some time. The use of heroin in people who have no tolerance to heroin can cause nausea, extreme nausea. And Joe had aspirated vomit into his lungs, and in effect, the cause of the heroin and the aspiration of vomit into his lungs, he choked to death, he suffocated to death.
News of Joe's death then had to be conveyed to his parents.
The only way to deliver that sort of message is personally. So police attended at their house in Newcastle. Subsequently, they were in contact with me. The next day, they were down in Canberra, and I took them out to the mortuary to see their son. At that stage, shock, disbelief, just shaking. They're extremely upset, as you'd imagine. I mean, this is something that I think that none of us could even imagine, losing a child, let alone having a child murdered.
In October 1998, Anu Singh and Madhave Rao stood trial for the murder of Joe Cinque. However, 4 weeks into the trial, the judge discharged the jury and ordered a retrial.
And the reason was he believed that when you have two people tried together, which they were, tried for the same offence of murder, that the evidence of one person couldn't be used against the evidence of the other person. And this is the reasoning.
In some Australian states, defendants can choose to have a trial by jury or judge alone. Anu Singh and Madhave Rao chose to be tried by judge alone. The following year, Joe's parents Maria and Nino returned to Canberra to watch the cases unfold in court.
They were people who arrived in the ACT having lost their son, with no idea of where to go or what to do, no idea of the legal system, as many people don't, and what's in store for them. So they needed help, they needed support. Detective Sergeant Rance and myself reached out to members of the Italian community here in the ACT, and the members of the Italian community were superb in the level of support they provided, with meals, with accommodation, because they weren't rich people. They're not rich people. I was always, from the moment I met them, impressed at their strength. I was impressed at their solidarity. They always presented a united front in court, and they sat there with dignity and listened to some of the most horrific aspects of the death of their son.
Madhavi Rao faced the judge in court.
The judge found that she did nothing wrong, totally nothing, walked free, walked out of the courtroom, not even a blemish on her. Not even the fact that she'd bought heroin, not even the fact that she'd obtained the Rohypnol, not even the fact that she'd organised the parties, that she'd done all this stuff to help Anu. Not only the fact that she'd spoken to a young girl and told her that Anu was going to kill Joe. Not only the fact that she'd organised 2 parties in which she knew Joe was going to die.
When the case against Anu Singh went to court, she faced 3 charges, including the murder of Giuseppe Joe Cinque. She pleaded not guilty to all charges on the grounds of diminished responsibility.
What caused the murder? There was no doubt. The judge even said she injected the heroin. So then we got to prove intent. Did she intend to do it?
On the 23rd of April 1999, the judge delivered his verdict.
The case then rested upon the mental state of the accused and the way in which the culpability for the killing of Joe Cinque was addressed by way of leading a case of impaired mental state was sufficiently convincing to the judge to reach the view that although she killed Joe Cinque, the reasons for doing so were sufficiently affected by her mental state, and on that basis she did not meet the requirements for a conviction of murder, but she met the requirements for a conviction of manslaughter.
The judge then awarded Singh a sentence of 10 years imprisonment, with a minimum of 4 years to be served.
Maria was Joe's mother, was extremely vocal in court at the delivery of the verdict. Joe's parents were distraught. They were distraught. And it's not hard to imagine why they were distraught.
They lost each other. So they lost the whole family. The whole family got lost in the end. It wasn't just the impact of a person dying, Joe dying. It was the long-term life impact upon every single member of that family.
And no one could ever appreciate how strongly this affected Maria and Mino. These trials are complex. You know, these trials are clinical. The law is cold. But you can't ever forget the human element that goes behind it, because there's always a human element behind it. And it's an important element because we're dealing with people's lives. We're not just dealing with a name.
Following this case, the law changed in the Australian Capital Territory, ending the option of homicide trials being heard by a judge only. In October 2001, Anu Singh was released from prison. She has since obtained a doctorate in criminology and law. Decades later, the void left by Joe Cinque's death remains undiminished.
The thing for me that stood out in relation to the death of Joe Cinque was that he was such a vital, fit young man. And there he was lying dead on the bed. And it wasn't his time. And it shouldn't have been his time. And he had so much in front of him and so much to look forward to, as did his mother and his father and his brother.
One October morning in Melbourne, Australia, paramedics arrived at the home of Sophia Sam and Sam Abraham to find 33-year-old Abraham dead. His wife Sophia would let his parents think he had died of a heart attack. It was a lie she and her lover, Arun Kamalasanan, would stick to. But could investigators unpick it?
The fact that Arun Kamalasanan dreamed up this killing for years is intense, it's disturbing. I was shocked, I was absolutely gobsmacked that they almost got away with this murder.
Originally from Kerala, India, Sam Abraham had moved to Melbourne, Australia in May 2013. He was joining his wife Sophia and their 6-year-old son, who had emigrated 5 months earlier. The couple had known each other since childhood, even singing in the same church choir. Studying at the same university, they began a romantic relationship and married in 2008.
Sophia appeared to be a very, very smart woman and had studied. She had gone to university in India. On all accounts, she was a wonderful mother to a young child. She seemed like a very popular, young, great mother and great wife.
Looking to build a new life in Australia, the family set down roots in the Melbourne suburb of Epping. Both commuted to the city, where Sam Abraham worked in a money exchange and Sophia for a web consultancy business. In July 2013, another friend from university arrived in Melbourne to further his studies. His name was Arun Kamalasanan.
Arun and Sophia had met in university and had been friends ever since then. He then became friends with Sam Abraham when Sophia first met him, and their families did things combined together. So Arun actually had a wife as well, and they also had a child, and they would catch up together in India. When Sam Abraham and Sophia Sam moved to Australia with their son, they didn't keep in contact.
Unbeknownst to their families, Arun and Sophia had maintained an illicit affair for years.
So back in 2013, where they started writing these diary entries to each other, essentially. So Sophia Sam was writing things, such as, "I wish to sleep in your arms, but I can't do that. I want to be yours, but you are not mine. You are the one for me, but you don't belong to me." Another entry read, "Why am I made with a rock heart? Why am I so cruel? Why am I so cunning? Why do you make me bad?"
Despite both being married with children, the couple were determined to resume their relationship, which they needed to keep secret. If it ever became public, it could shame their families.
We had some young lovers, we had Arun Kamalasanan and Sophia Sam, who were meeting each other secretly on the side and had come up with a plan of how could we get rid of her husband.
poisoning takes some planning in order to obtain the relevant poison, and some planning in order to make sure that the poison can be administered and is likely to be ingested or taken in by the person in some way. That requires probably a level of planning that's greater than the more spontaneous interpersonal violence.
Kamalasanan settled on using cyanide. Cyanide kills quickly, preventing cells from using oxygen and swiftly assaulting the brain, heart, and the central nervous system. Difficult to access in Australia, Kamalasanan looked to India to source it.
He travelled to India months before and purchased the cyanide and brought it back with him on a plane. This was premeditated murder.
On the night of the 13th of October 2015, Arun Kamalasanan and Sophia Sam executed their plan.
Sophia Sam had actually ducked down to the shops and swung by her sister's house and had a little visit there late in the evening at about 10:30, the night of the 13th. And then when she's returned home, Arun was laying in wait out in the front of the house, and he's come in through the garage.
While Kamalasanan waited in the garage, Sophia made her husband an avocado smoothie, which was later laced with a sedative.
Then he has come into the house in the middle of the night, and they suspect that this has happened around 2 a.m. in the morning, and he claims that he put the cyanide in a cup of orange juice and that mixed it all up, and that he held Sam Abraham up in his bed and gave him little sips over a period of about 20 minutes and then laid him back down. It would have had to be very small doses. Our swallow reflexes even work when you're asleep. So if a small amount of liquid goes into your mouth, you automatically will swallow.
On the morning of the 14th of October 2015, emergency services were called to the house.
Sophia told the police that she woke up in the morning and couldn't rouse her husband. So he was in bed and she thought he was still sleeping, and she tried to wake him up.
Paramedics attended at 9:27 a.m, but were unable to revive Abraham, who was declared dead shortly afterwards. Sam Abraham's death was referred to the coroner.
If the coroner thinks it's appropriate, an autopsy will be ordered, and then the pathologist will carry out the autopsy. And the aim of the autopsy is to work out the cause of death and help with the reconstruction of the circumstances of the death.
The early assumption was that Abraham had died from a heart attack.
He was a father, a 33-year-old man who had, on all accounts, lived an unhealthy lifestyle, and his wife had told authorities this, and that he had taken some medications and he was slightly overweight, and she had sort of planted the seed that it was potentially a heart attack. And when police arrived at the scene, there was nothing to indicate that there was any foul play, no one had broken in. It was just a husband and wife had gone to bed, and when she woke up, she found her husband deceased.
Herald Sun court reporter Rebecca Kavanagh was in touch with Abraham's family.
His family were obviously devastated that their son, brother, had died. He was only 33, so it was tragic, and he was living on the other side of the world with who they thought was his loving wife and his son, so they were truly devastated.
Despite the suggestion of a heart attack, police had to rule out foul play.
This case had already been flagged by the police as being a case that might involve a suspicion about how the death occurred and whether there was involvement of other persons in the death. Because this man's death was considered suspicious by the police, the pathologist was looking for particular things that could determine whether the person died of natural causes or whether they might have died through the actions of another person.
Abraham's body showed no obvious outward injuries. So the pathologist prepared samples for toxicology tests.
In taking toxicology tests, we would certainly take blood samples and urine samples, probably fluid from the eye, samples of the liver, but we'd also take stomach contents. Now, if there's an increased amount of poison in the stomach, that may well suggest that that's the route of entry of the poison into the body.
So this forensic pathologist that day got the toxicology form, which includes a number of boxes on it of different drugs and poisons, and one of those boxes is cyanide.
Given how uncommon cyanide is in suspicious deaths in Australia, the poison is rarely flagged for testing.
But for some reason, that day, he ticked off the box and sent off the toxicology for analysis. And if he didn't tick that box, then essentially Arun Kamalasanan and Sophia Sam could have got away with this murder. This forensic pathologist's due diligence to tick that box on that day was their undoing.
The toxicology results were striking.
It was described as an extreme level of cyanide found in Sam Abraham's body. This level would have killed him.
A cyanide level of just 1 milligram per litre can be fatal. Toxicology results showed cyanide levels as high as 35 milligrams per litre in Sam Abraham's blood.
They actually said in court that it would have been a very painful and excruciating death for him, and that he would have been thrashing around in the bed once the poison had taken effect. It was described that cyanide poisoning, while to the murderer is a silent weapon, for the actual person who has been poisoned, it is one of the most excruciating deaths.
At last, Abraham's body was released, enabling his funeral to take place back in Kerala, where his heartbroken family had been making preparations.
They held a funeral, they had to pay for his body to go back to India so that they could do their burial and religious ceremonies. If Sophia Sam went back with them, she put on a brave face, or put on a facade really, it was all fake.
There, surrounded by mourners, she attended Abraham's farewell, even placing a parting kiss on her husband's brow while absorbing the support of his inconsolable family.
She went back there, she kept up with the story that this was, you know, a tragedy and that her husband had died in his sleep and that it must have been a heart attack, when all along she knew exactly what had happened. She had poisoned her husband as he slept.
What she didn't know, however, were the results from the toxicology tests, and that the police were onto her.
The homicide squad got involved and asked the coroner's office not to release the details of the toxicology report or cause of death to Sam Abraham's family or anyone else but the homicide squad. And that was to give them enough time to prepare their case and investigate.
In the case of a poisoning, you might be interested to find out how the poison was administered. What were the circumstances in which the poison got into the body? For example, it might have been injected. it might have been swallowed.
On her return to Australia, Sophia kept up the facade of a grieving daughter-in-law while seeing more of Arun Kamalasanan.
Sophia Sam continued her relationship with her deceased husband's family. So after he died, she kept up the facade and continued ringing them. Meanwhile, here in Australia, she was continuing to meet up with Arun Kamalasanan. She essentially was going on with her life without her husband.
Unbeknownst to Sophia, she was under surveillance.
Instead of just looking at what happened that evening, we may have to look at what individuals were doing over days, weeks, or months prior to that, to look for the sorts of activities that can be part of preparing for a poisoning of a person.
The police recorded Sophia and Arun lunching in the city, shopping together, and gathering for discreet rendezvous. 5 months after her husband's death, Sophia transferred their car, which had been registered under Abraham's name, to Arun.
The police were able to track their movements, to bug their phones, and essentially catch them out, either talking about it or admitting the crime. They were essentially on the front foot because the two perpetrators had no idea and thought that they had got away with murder.
From March to August 2016, Kamalasanan became the focus of an undercover police operation.
These covert officers ended up approaching Arun Kamalasanan and befriended him and made him feel a part of their group, made him feel special. They took advantage of the fact that he was a vulnerable man who was living on minimal money here in Australia and befriended him over many, many months. And over that period of time, they managed to elicit a confession from him. So one of the things that Arun Kamalasanan actually told these covert officers who he believed were his friends was, I took that guy off. That was him describing that, I killed this guy. And he was saying it in such a calm and collected way that, that he killed him. Then he described how he did it and where he got the cyanide from. Even one of the covert officers replied saying, it just seems all a bit unbelievable, doesn't it? It's all very unbelievable. And in some of the audio, you hear them laughing together. As he's describing this, he's like laughing and saying, and I got away with this and this is what we did. And so I think he was very cocky and believed 100% that he had got away with this murder at that point in time.
With that admission, the lovers were arrested on the 18th of August 2016, charged with the murder of Sam Abraham. Searching Kamalasanan's home, police found the diary shared by the couple, which detailed their affair. Over the course of the 10-month investigation, detectives were able to establish not just how Sam Abraham died, but by whom. The revelation was a shocking blow to Sam Abraham's family. Standing trial at Victoria's Supreme Court on the 21st of February 2018, the couple were found guilty of murder. As the principal orchestrator of the crime, Arun Kamalasanan was sentenced to 27 years in jail. Sophia Sam was sentenced to 22 years. 18 months later, their appeals against their convictions were dismissed.
Sam's family actually spoke out from India following the sentencing, and I believe their words were that she should never be released. They said Sophia Sam should never be released from prison for what she did. Their words were she should rot in jail. This decision by Arun Kamalasanan and Sophia Sam to take Sam Abraham's life has had a traumatic impact on so many people, you know, from his family, his friends, to his young son who is going to grow up without a father figure and also without a mother. You know, his mum is now in jail, his father is dead, and he's away from his father's family. You know, they are in India, and this they're feeling quite helpless because they're on the other side of the world. They're not having a relationship with their grandchild. So it's been absolutely devastating. The flow-on effects from this horrendous crime is just endless.